make sure that we get credit for the class, and we'll probably have to do a little pause in between once in a while, making sure that everyone's there. So since it's just me running the class, I'm not going to be looking at the notes, the message section on Zoom. So please, if you have a question, unmute your mic and ask away. And if you're not asking a question, make sure that your mic is muted so we don't hear any background conversation. So if you have come to this class before, that's great. It's good that you're here again. There's definitely a lot of information to go over because we use a lot of examples of what I see when we go over this. First off, I guess introduction. Some of you may know who I am, some of you may not. I'm one of the owners and brokers of the company and one of the founders of the company. So been doing this, I got my license in 94. So this is, been doing this a little bit, been doing this for a little bit. So the great news is myself, I kind of oversee all of the risk management. Myself with Matt Barton and Ken Averett, we do kind of our risk management or compliance. And we're here to really help you to make sure that the transactions that you're working on are going to be protected, and that if you don't know what you're supposed to be doing, that you have a resource to go to before a problem occurs versus after the problem occurs. That's definitely the preference. You want to make sure that you do that. So this class, when I teach it at Stringham, it's a 4-hour class that I have to condense in 2 hours. So just know that there's some areas that we're going to spend a lot more time on. And the reason for it is because I want you to understand the importance of that section. And then there's others that we may just blitz through really quick or not even touch at all, because there is so much that we have to cover. So that being said, do we have any questions offhand before we get started?
What's your favorite color?
What's what?
What's your favorite color?
It's my favorite color.
Is it blue?
It would not be blue, believe it or not.
Red.
Red is the favorite color. There,
Questions adjourned.
there it is. There it is. But my son's favorite color is blue. Okay, so that being said, we're going to jump into this first paragraph. And even though this first paragraph only has a few sentences, it'll probably take us 20 to 30 minutes to cover this first paragraph. This first paragraph has a lot into it, and several of the things that are being discussed, there may be things that I want to make sure that you guys understand what this is talking about. So obviously it's talking about earnest money. What is earnest money?
You have to submit with your offer. You tell them the time it has to be in, but essentially, I mean, I understand it as money that shows how serious you are about buying the property.
Okay, okay, I like that. Anyone else? This is an interactive class.
Money to save the property.
Money to save the property.
You know,
I consider it a small deposit.
Small deposit, okay. So there's a term that was given to this. Kind of, it was defined when I'm not asking you guys to raise your hand, but if for those of you that were more recent in getting your license, they defined this as predetermined liquidated damages. So let's think about that. Why would they say that? Predetermined liquidated damages. What does that mean?
In case of default,
Okay, what do you mean by that?
the buyer decides not to buy and ends up wasting time soon.
Okay, I like that. Great answer.
Don't get approved in the law.
Okay, so now the buyer can't qualify. So if you couldn't hear online, what the answer was, in case of default. Now, default as we're going to discuss further in the contract, is a default, does that only exist for the buyer?
No.
So can it exist for the seller as well?
Indeed.
Okay, absolutely. See, Rachel? What this is talking about, think about it, predetermined. So let's just break it down that way. Predetermined, where buyer and seller are coming together at the very beginning before any issues come along. And they say, hey, I'm interested in the property. People said like, like a buyer that might be interested. I'm interested in the property and I'm willing to put at risk X dollars in the event something happens. And that same dollar amount applies to the seller. So has anyone heard where a seller has just decided not to sell the house? It happens. I've had it happen myself several times. They're just like, sorry, I'm not moving. Okay, well, that same earnest money that is being held is now at risk by the seller. So they would be obligated under the contract to be responsible for that. So, and then of course, liquidated damages in the event that default occurs. Okay, so predetermined liquidated damages is what this is at. Okay. Now let's dive into the first couple of sentences, because the first couple of sentences can be a little bit confusing, primarily because it's now been probably 6 years ago when this contract got updated, and one of the changes that they made in this first paragraph changed what we used to say. And we're going to jump around a little bit. So for example, where is earnest money held? In the trust account. Whose trust account? Okay. You've been talking to your husband a little too much. Okay. Well, she's too accurate right now. Okay. If we're representing a buyer. We represent a buyer. Where is earnest money held? Whose trust account?
Century 21.
Okay.
Or the one that supposed to be decide on seller and buyer.
Okay. Okay. Those are all right answers. Either some of you have taken my class before or been coached by husbands or something else. So normally what people tell me is it's held in the buyer's broker's trust account, right? Because if I represent a buyer, I'm going to hold it into the buyer's broker's trust account. Well, our old contract, it said earnest money will be held at the buyer's broker's trust account. Well, when they updated this form, made a couple of changes, the sentence that said that will be held in the buyer's broker's trust account, it got removed. I don't know if it was accidental or not, but it was removed. Now, when we look at it, it says we're going to down to here, the brokerage shall have 4 calendar days in which to deposit the earnest money into the brokerage real estate trust account. So that means it could either be the buyer or it could be the seller's brokerage trust account. It just has to be, according to the contract, it has to be in a brokerage real estate trust account. Now, can buyer and seller change what is defined here? The answer is yes. There is an addendum that's if there are real estate brokerages out there that do not have a trust account. And so their brokerage policy is that they will hold it into a title company's trust account. And if that is the direction that buyer and seller choose to go, you must use the title company addendum, because there's additional language the buyer and seller need to be aware of that says in the event of releasing this earnest money, it may require both buyer and seller to authorize the release of that earnest money.
So do you ever do that really? Because it seems really,
Do what? Put it in a title company trust account?
Yeah, or even like, let's say, you know, I present an offer to a seller and they're like, okay, but we want it in our brokerage trust account. Do they really push back on that? Because it seems like if something happened and you need to get that money back, then you're jumping through many hoops possibly to get it. To me, it just seems like best practice to keep it here.
I agree with you, but what if your brokerage that you represent a buyer doesn't have a trust account?
I thought by law they had to have one.
No,
Don't they have to have one? They just maybe don't have to use it.
they don't have to have, they'll have a an operating account. They do not have to hold a trust account to hold earnest money.
Really? I thought I learned in real estate school that they like have to have one.
They do not have to, like equity, unless they change, they don't have one. Keller Williams typically didn't. And a lot of the smaller brokerages, oftentimes they don't. They use title companies to hold their earnest money. Now, if you're going to hold earnest money, then you must have a trust account. That's the difference. They do not have to, we do not have to have a trust account. And let's be honest, if we chose as a company not to have a trust account, you know, a whole lot less liability that we would have. But our company has chosen that we believe it's a better business practice to have it. So we're taking on that liability to provide additional services to our clients and to our agents. But no, we don't have to have it. So your question was, wouldn't it make sense just to do that? I'm here to say if I'm representing a seller and I receive an offer from an agent that does not, their brokerage does not have one, I'm going to have that earnest money held here. So I'm that agent that is like, if you don't have it at your trust account, you don't have one, then we're holding it at our trust account.
So the only time you get pushback on that is if you didn't have a trust account to put it in.
Yeah, I mean,
Like if I present an offer to someone, they're not gonna be like, I don't want it in Century 21, you gotta bring it here. It's
They
just as
shouldn't.
long as
Now,
it's in one.
is it possible that someone may have that type of heartburn? Yeah. If the seller is wanting to have that much more control, then sure, they could do it. But I would feel fine if the other brokerage has their own trust account. I'd be okay with that. I have used title companies I use it as a last resort. Typically, if it's going to be a quick close, like a cash transaction close in 7 days, then I'll go that avenue to have it held there. But otherwise, very seldom will I choose to put it in a title company because we lose control.
And it's harder to get back if you need to get it back, right?
Correct. And we're going to talk about there's going to be a section of the contract we'll talk about why it's harder to get back. So just table that for a second. Let's go back in here. Okay. The property described below and agrees to, so buyer and seller and the property agree to deliver no later than 4 calendar days after acceptance an earnest money deposit amount of X. Okay, so when we're talking about here at our company, we have earnest money, we have a trust account, so we will be deposited. So when do you turn earnest money into us?
4 days of acceptance of offer.
After 4 days? Within 4 days. Okay.
Or what you said to put it in the account.
So first off, my question, when would you turn it into the company?
As soon as I can have it.
As soon as you can.
Okay, I like that answer.
Yes, that's the smart answer.
So but what if you guys, let's just say it's a Friday, let's say it's a Thursday, you write an offer tonight. It is Thursday, how about that? It's today. Today you receive an offer, how about that? And you're gonna write an offer, your client gives you the earnest money check, and it technically does not go under contract. You're going back and forth. It goes under contract Tuesday of next week. But you have an earnest money check. What should you be doing with that?
I think that you need to turn it in
Okay,
I don't think you should be, if you hold it.
Turn it in by end of day of Friday.
Say just hold on to this till Tuesday when we go under contract and then give it.
Well, I think you have until Monday, right? The 4 days, but you want to turn it in.
we're gonna go under contract on Tuesday. Okay, so we got several different answers. I love this. This is great discussion. And all of them are great thoughts and answers. I've heard one that is the right answer. Anyone want to figure out which one that was?
Immediately.
Okay, so we've got some quicker ones, we've got some delayed ones, we got some intermediate ones. Okay,
At least by Friday, Monday.
so is it possible? So the answer with first is immediately, like as soon as you get the check, turn it in the office. Okay, is it possible your offer doesn't get accepted? So what's the office supposed to do? We're supposed to just hurry and give your check, rifle through all of the checks, try to get those back? The answer is when you're going to turn it into the office is once it goes under contract, as soon as you can. If you're holding that check, great, hold that check. It's your responsibility. And if you don't want that responsibility and you want to wait until you go under contract, that's okay too. Now, if your client is going to be out of town, that'll be a little more difficult for you. But yeah, you've got to hold that check because it's possible your offer will not be accepted. And we cannot deposit that check until it gets under contract. So we're not going to be holding on to dozens, hundreds of checks and trying to figure out which one we're supposed to deposit until it goes under contract. And that's when you're turning it into us, because once we get it, we will deposit it. So if we got it early, it's possible that check would get deposited and we don't have a property to attach it to, or the client is like, wait a minute, I thought this is supposed to be deposited once we went under contract. We never went under contract. So you're gonna receive the check. Now, but it's important to understand the dates here, because there's two sets of timelines that this paragraph talks about. First one, 4 calendar days after acceptance, we have the time to receive the check. Now, if you get that check right when you wrote the offer, you've already satisfied this first timeline. Now, once acceptance occurs, which is on, we said Tuesday, then that's going to take us to the next piece in the form of after acceptance of the REPC by buyer and seller and receipt of the earnest money by the brokerage, you're the representative of the brokerage. Then the brokerage shall have 4 calendar days in which to deposit the earnest money into the broker's trust account. So again, 2 different dates, but let's talk about, I want to use certain examples so we can figure out exactly what this was. Today, we're writing an offer, we get the check today. Tuesday, we go under contract. We've already done the second piece of this part. We've already got that. So that receipt has already happened. We're just waiting for potential acceptance to occur. And once that has, great, this timeline has now been satisfied. Now, let's say hypothetically, we don't take the check today. I write the offer today, still it goes under contract on Tuesday. Tuesday, one of the two has happened. So we have until when to actually receive it.
4 days from Tuesday.
So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Saturday, we have time to receive the check. So if I got the check on Saturday, now that timeline's done. Now it bumps us down to here. Acceptance and receipt has now happened. So now the next clock starts ticking. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. By Wednesday of the following week, the brokerage must have it deposited into their trust account. Now, this last timeline is important. If you're coming in on Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. thinking, here's my check, done my deal, I've satisfied my need, you're going to be late. Okay? we will not get that deposit in time. So even though this says has 4 calendar days to do it, you got to give us that time to get it done. Okay? So if you're holding on to that check, get it into, that's why the first answer was get it into us as soon as possible. Once you're under contract is great, is the best answer. Now we've had, just to say, we've had people, they put it in their wallet, all of a sudden they go on a vacation, they totally forget to turn it in. You're kind of in a tough spot. Because your client gave you the earnest money and we didn't do our job to protect it. And this is kind of where we're going around this whole paragraph. The division, this paragraph, because it's talking about the public's money, that is where they don't mess around. When the public's money is at risk, they hold us accountable very, very heavily. So we want to make sure that we are protecting our clients' money as much as possible, whenever possible, and make sure that we do what we're supposed to be doing.
I was just wondering what would be like the latest that you can come in, not that you should, but let's say you're like running late, that you could drop off the check still.
They, 4 o'clock, that's when they, no, that's not the latest to do it.
Oh,
That's when they shut it down. So that means they have to, before that, I don't know where there's, each day could be different because they may have been able to have already run everything and they shut it, their cutoff line is 4 o'clock. They may be able to take it then and still have time to deposit it. But they may have started a little bit before. I would just, if you got it in the morning on that 4th day, you're gonna be fine. We're gonna deposit everything we can in the morning. But still do not wait to the last minute. Now, if this is something that would be, let's say you go under contract on Friday at 5:05, okay? We're now closed, right? So Saturday's closed, Sunday's closed, Monday's a holiday. Very realistic, right? So Tuesday is the first opportunity that you guys are gonna have to turn that earnest money in. Okay, just come deposit up, bring it up here at Tuesday morning, plenty of time, not gonna be a problem. We're not gonna go into it this class. We also have another earnest money depositing option. It's called Earnest. And that way, if your client is from out of state or whatever, you can sign them up through that and they can do it and it'll post just like it's an ACH payment. So it's another way to do it that you don't have to worry about this. A separate class, we can talk about that a little later. So I just wanted timelines. So you have a maximum timeline of what? What's the longest amount of time that it could take for you to get the earnest money deposited into the trust account?
8 days.
8 days. Okay, does that mean, so if I receive it on day 2, what's the maximum amount of time to get it deposited? 6, exactly. It's all triggered based on when you receive the earnest money. And then the shortest time would be 4. Because if you got it when it's before you even go under contract, the first part's already gone. Very clear?
So let me see if I understand it correctly. So I write the offer today,
Okay,
okay? The acceptance, they have until tomorrow to accept.
okay,
Okay, they accept it tomorrow.
okay.
So now the buyer has until, so you got Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday to turn it in, right?
Okay, not to turn it in, to receive it,
To receive it.
to receive it.
Okay. And then now the seller has, so that's Tuesday, so you got Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday
For we, the brokerage, for us, the brokerage,
to,
get it deposited
right,
into the trust account.
okay,
But Saturday we're closed. We're not gonna be open Saturday, so that would not be a possibility. So you'd have to get it into us by Friday.
Right.
Early enough on Friday to get it deposited. If that was your timeline, Friday morning, you would want to get that deposit, get it to us so we could get it deposited. Okay? We're approaching the holidays. I'm here to let you know. don't know which day of the week they are gonna be, but around Thanksgiving, New Year's Eve, Christmas Eve, we typically shut down at noon or 2 o'clock or something like that. I can't remember what it is, like on Christmas Eve or a day or two before the holiday. So be aware of that. Again, we will do whatever we can, whatever's deposited early in the morning, we're gonna take care of that right off the bat, but just don't wait till the last minute. That's the message. Get it done as soon as you can. Okay? A lot of information for this, but it's very important. Nothing's gonna allow you to lose your license faster with the division if you did something recklessly to lose earnest money. We all make mistakes. They're not gonna just, a mistake happens, your license is gone. No, but if we are doing things carelessly, this is where this can be a big deal. Okay? All right. I promise we're gonna get into more in-depth stuff that I actually have examples. Okay, first paragraph. Inclusions, talk about property. Identify the property. The new contract broke it out. We always used to say, put the address, also known as. Now it actually defines it. It actually tells you what is the tax ID. So that way you want to make sure it's the right property. I kid you not, we have closed on properties that had the wrong address and they got recorded as the wrong address, and a neighbor's house ended up being sold. It's wrong information. So it sounds like, it happens. So I'm not a fan. Have I written a contract with handwriting? Yes, I have. But that was years ago. I haven't done one in years. I will wait, or I'll have my computer right there, the property, if I have to type it in, because I'll throw myself in the mix. Some of us have terrible, terrible handwriting. And if we can't read it, we're going to try to do the best we can. I mean, it makes it very, very difficult. You want to make sure it's accurate. So try to avoid manual contracts. Okay. Included items. This is, we're going to go back to our licensing period. Some of you may have been a lot earlier than myself, but I remember, I bet I can just ask this question, kind of open-ended and probably, what is that would be applicable in this category? What was the real estate vocabulary word that you learned that would apply to this paragraph?
Fixtures.
Okay. We got, if anything, we spent roughly, I don't know when you guys got, how much you had to pay, $1,500 to $1,800. $1,800 of an investment, and we learned a new word, fixture, right? How many of us feel like we have a pretty good understanding of what fixture means? This is a participation. Everyone, I don't want to see any of this stuff. Fully in or out. Any would not understand what fixture is, and it's okay if you don't.
There's two types of fixtures, right? Trade fixtures and regular
Okay.
fixtures.
All. Okay. 95%, 98%, at least of the group here, I don't know online, I couldn't see. They feel pretty confident about what a fixture is. I'm gonna pick on you. You were the first one to raise. What's your name? Hannah?
Uh-huh.
Hannah. Pretty confident?
Yeah, it took me a couple times to pass that darn test, so I feel like I did.
Which one did you have on you?
In cash,
Sure.
couple $2 bills.
Ooh.
$2 bills.
Ooh,
He's whipping out his $2 bills.
Oh, I had some.
I have a dollar.
Maybe a 20.
Oh, okay. I'll leave that what you have. All right. You ready to, you willing to bet your 20?
Sure.
My 20 against your 20?
Man,
Woo!
man, I've never seen this happen.
All right, I haven't done this. We ready to do this?
I'll be the trump.
Okay, here, come on up here.
I'll be
Hannah.
the buyer broker. You got it.
All right, here's the customer. It's money right there. Okay?
Oh, man.
So you feel pretty confident about what a fixture is.
Maybe now not.
Okay. Okay. So first time, what is a fixture?
Fixtures are attached to the property.
Okay. Pretty good definition.
Yeah.
Fixtures attached to property, okay? So give me an example of what you would define as a fixture. Whoever has their,
Cabinet,
okay, cabinets,
yes.
okay, kitchen cabinets.
Kitchen cabinet, and then like a tray or
Guess you call it friend.
Chandelier.
something like this would be considered a tray fixture, correct? Because I can take.
I-
away
hey,
and
you-
it has
you
to
got-
do with the
You guys have
business.
added your own little new term here, trade. I'm not even going that complicated.
Oh dear.
Where's it? You're not.
Oh man, I need that 20. Just kidding. Wait, what was the question?
Just define.
Oh
what a
my God.
fixture- It was,
A
it was attached to the property.
A fixture is attached to the property that does not take away its identity.
Okay, so she's really going and define. So far, you're doing spot on. Right now, you're earning that $20. Okay, you're doing great here. You're doing great here. Okay. Everyone feel pretty good about her answer?
Yeah.
Okay, for those of you that raised your hand. Yeah, okay, I would have said the same thing. All right. Okay. This is where the game gets real.
Oh my God.
So it's attached to the property, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, what about that big screen TV that you have attached above your fireplace?
The television would be not attached to the property.
Is it?
It,
No,
well.
it's a fixture, dumbass.
Whoa,
It's
doesn't matter.
not.
You didn't say dumbass. You said dumb, doesn't matter. That's what he said. I
I
translated that one
personally-
quickly. The fixture, it's attached, right?
Yes, but it's not,
Unless.
I feel like.
This right here. I'm not gonna take your money, but you,
No, but I
you
feel
got,
like
you got the response.
well, that's where the trade fixtures come in,
The TV
because
mount.
it's not, the TV mount,
Unless they just.
It's a
mold
fixture.
So what
it
you're,
to the TV.
this is where I'm getting at.
kind
Okay.
of like the, like if you were to be selling a property for a barber shop or a salon and it had the barber chair attached, like the person, I could take that with me if I was selling that property.
Well, you can take anything with you. You know, I can take the kitchen cabinets with me if I want.
But if I would
I
have
can't.
to include,
I would have to exclude them.
I would have to exclude it. And then if they wanted to purchase it, if they wanted that to be a part of what they were purchasing the property, it would be a bill of sale.
If it's
You have
considered
to-
personal, if it's
If
considered
it's
personal.
considered personal property
property.
that they wanted to include with the property being sold,
Okay.
then they'd have to do it with the bill of sale.
Great answers. These are all great answers, but what I wanted to see right here at the bat was someone's very confident, willing to put their money down, and then all of a sudden, once I threw out like little confidence went from 95, 90, I don't even know what it was, but it dropped considerably for a
And it did
second.
drop.
Okay, that's all I wanted to get. I didn't want your money. Thank you. All right, give her participation.
Was it an all right answer though?
Absolutely spectacular answer. But the key thing is this. A fixture, yes, we've learned terminology. But when push comes to shove, a fixture for you might be completely different than what I consider the fixture to be. When we're trying to now, we're at the closing table, where's the TV? Where's the barbershop chair? Where's that? Because they were never addressed in the contract. All of a sudden, we've created confusion. Now, fortunately, when this contract was redone 6 years ago, they added additional language. Because 7 years ago, I was dealing with the TV issue. The TV, the speaker, I'm gonna use, keep the furnace, this is downstairs. The projectors, the speakers of your entertainment system. If they're in the wall mount, oh, okay, that's a fixture. But if they're mounted outside the bracket, it wasn't. Really? So because of those big items that we always had to address, it got put in the contract. All installed TV mounting brackets. So the bracket itself is the fixture. Is it fair to say that using the word trade fixture, they could have thought, oh, that was a trade fixture. That's also gone. To this day, we still have people taking the TV mounting brackets when they remove the TV. They have to bring them back. all wall and ceiling mounting speakers. So it's no longer just the ones that are cut in the wall that are put in. If they're mounted on the outside, that's included automatically. Automatic garage door openers. Doesn't that sound like personal property? So it does to me. It's not fixed to anything. It's a universal remote potentially, right? But it could go, I know what you're thinking. Trust me, I'm with you on your thought process. I can think both sides because you guys come to me on both sides. The two of you who are both my agent, and therefore I represent buyer and seller, you're coming to me and saying it's not included, and you're coming to me and saying that it is included. I'm a limited agent. I can't take sides. Oh, I like you better, like I can't do that. So I have to look at this. So that's my point. When I get these questions, well, I get it. So I've been there, and that's why defining in the contract becomes so important. The one thing that people forget about our contracts, every word matters. And when we think of drafting an addendum and we exclude one word, unintentionally could change everything you were trying to do. So that's one of the reasons why we should never draft contracts and use those that are provided for us whenever possible. Okay? The other part, this is the big deal. Solar panels. So your seller, we're selling buyer, your seller has solar panels and you didn't even know. Seller never told you, the roof was so high you didn't even notice. You go under contract, seller still owes 15 grand on the solar panels. Does the seller have to pay that off and give them to him? They're included. Big problem, huh? Because we use the word trade fixture. Could that also be identified as a trade fixture? Why not? They're leased. The lease agreement's right there. If they're not paid for, that company will come and remove them.
But removing them damages the roof.
I didn't say there wasn't another problem.
So if that happens though, does the buyer then, like, they'll put a lien on the house for the solar panels, right? So then the buyer then becomes responsible for the lien.
The new buyer, and then the buyer can look at it, hey, I got a contract, seller. So the solar panel company, they're going to follow the property, whoever owns the property. They're not going to follow who signed the contract on the lease agreement. We have a solar panel addendum. Make sure you use that if you are involved with solar panel, because it answers all these questions. But this is where it ends up being a big deal.
So my question is, they changed the contract to put like the TV mounting brackets. Are they going to change it to include projector mounting brackets? Because they have the TVs in the speakers, but the projector one's not in there.
I'm with you.
Do they have Ring doorbells?
Okay. Well, so now that this is kind of the thing that sparked everything. What does that little circular thing look like? Cookie. It does.
Oh, the Nest system, or the B, whatever.
Okay.
System nested a smart home device.
The Nest. So you're one of those people that want to make their home smart, like you make a smart home, right? Oh, my home's awesome. It's got this, it's got that. You can walk in and the lights just turn on. Well, it also costs you thousands of dollars to do that, and you want to market this property what it is, but then 2 days before closing, you go remove the thermostat and go put the old one back in. Can you do that? No. Why not? Personal property, isn't it? Or is this a trade fixture?
Because if the people walk through it and they see that's part of your marketing or part of your sale. So that's your house. That's part of the house.
Okay, I think it's a good answer.
it's hard to not get paranoid because I've heard some people say like, I take pictures of things because of these horror stories where it's like, you know, there was this really nice projector and then they switched it out for a junky one. So like, at what point do you like really have to go around and take pictures of everything to make sure they don't switch it out for something junky?
It's a great answer, or great question. And I can't give you an answer what is the right thing to do, what is not the right thing. At the end of the day, we're supposed to be honest and have integrity in what's being done. Now, is it possible if I represent a seller that my seller goes and does that stuff without my knowledge? Yes, of course. I can't control that. I didn't do anything wrong as an agent. Should I, when I list the property, can I ask the seller question? Hey, is there anything in this property right now that you intend to take with you when this when it sells? I notice you have a projector. Are you leaving that? I notice you have a Nest thermostat. Are you leaving it? Things that I know that are common issues. You got the Vivint. Oh, that was so close. Almost had it. You have the Vivint smart doorbell ring. You've got everything going on your house. Your door locks, the security system. Are you leaving that? Or are you taking that with you? Well, no, I'm going to be taking it with me. Okay, well then my suggestion would be before we put this on the market, before we get pictures taken, let's remove it all. Well, wait, well, why? Because it's such a great marketing tool. Makes my house look so much better. I get it. But you're marketing something that's not going to exist. Now, if you want to say that you want to have pictures that just show what it can look like, or if they do want to include it when they're selling the property, this is the problem. You're going to have the buyer that's going to be so excited about everything that you have. How are you? You're going to have them want to keep it with the purchase. Well, they can if they pay me enough money. I get it. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to get your home sold, what right now is $3,000 to $4,000, $5,000, whatever it is, do you really think you're going to let $5,000 stay from accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish? When push comes to shove, they typically aren't going to do it. And that may not be the thing that's going to prevent the buyer from buying the home. So remove it. So I can do that, right? I can be proactive. I can see these things happening. Because otherwise, what's going to happen? Fortunately, you're going to have someone like on our team that understands this thing very well. Unless excluded here, the sale includes the following items presently owned and properly owned in place: plumbing, heating, air conditioning, fixtures, and equipment. If that was in place at the time of making the offer, that is part of the equipment. That stays. And that seller has an obligation to bring that back.
I have a question.
Yeah.
As long as it's spelled out in the MLS that some things are excluded or, you know,
No.
like, so no?
Nope.
MLS.
Sorry, I jumped in because I knew exactly where you're going with this. You're saying if it's on the MLS and the MLS says these are not included or excluded, whatever, then that should be your protection, right?
Oh, no, like, so like just when it comes to marketing, like it's in the pictures, but you know that it's saying that it's excluded or negotiable in the sale. Would that be okay though? Like, and that still work out?
What do you mean? Can it still work
Well,
out?
like for example, the last one I did, she had a nest that it was negotiable. So basically it just spelled out in the MLS that some of these things were negotiable when it came to the actual bill of sale, like in the purchase contract, so we could specify them. And that was okay to keep in the marketing, right?
Sure, you can, sorry, you can always do that. You can say something's negotiable. Where I thought you were going, and I apologize if you weren't. If you said the Nest thermostat on the MLS, it's not included. If you said in the remarks, the Nest thermostat is not included just on the MLS, and that did not carry over into the offer, into the REPC, and the REPC did not exclude the Nest thermostat, the REPC is going to govern. Doesn't matter what you say on the MLS. There's even a little disclaimer at the bottom of the MLS that this is used for informational purposes only.
You
The
should have-
contract, the MLS is not a contract between buyer and seller. The REPC is. So, yeah, if you want to say that the Nest thermostat's negotiable on the MLS, great, you can do that. And when I made the offer, I included whatever's there. That was my negotiation, and if the seller didn't see it, my negotiation won, they just included it. Does that make sense?
Yep, just keep it on the REPC, right?
Whatever's on the REPC will govern. That's all I'm getting at. Okay? All right. Go down here. Okay, we'll go down to section 2. Okay. Seems like this should be pretty easy to fill out, but I still see people make mistakes on this all the time. When you, and to this day, I'm okay at math. I'm not great at math. But I will still use a calculator just to make sure that my information is done right. Even if it appears to be okay, I'm still going to just double check. So let's just say that I'm making a $400,000 purchase. So $400,000 is the purchase price. I'm going to start with that right here. They're going to get a 90-10 loan. What does that mean?
Borrowing 90%, 10% down.
Okay, so 10% down. Of which, let's say that earnest money is $10,000. Okay, so where does the $10,000 earnest money go in this section?
A.
Hey, okay, $10,000 goes right here. Okay, we're not going to have additional earnest money, so that's just left blank. New loan. What's the loan amount?
360.
I like that answer better.
90% of the purchase price.
See, we already kind of said, see, already. 360 is going here. Okay, because it's a 90-10 loan, we're going to borrow 90%. That's the loan amount. 360 goes there. We're not doing seller financing, it's blank. So what number goes here? The
The
balance of the purchase price.
the rest, the difference between the 10.
30.
Okay. Many times people think, well, wait a minute. No, it's the 40 because they have to, they're getting a 90-10 loan, they have to come 10% down. I agree with you, they do. But the earnest money counts as part of that 10%. And we're already holding that with the brokerage. So when they show up with the title company, they have to just bring the $30,000 in with them. And then the title company they'll do closing and escrow. They're going to gather the funds. They're going to collect the money from the lender. Bring in your check, the 30 grand. And so the purchase price is going to be 400. So get your calculator out and you add those up. 10 plus 360 plus 30, does that equal 400? It should.
Yes.
And if that number equals that number, you're probably pretty good. But you would be amazed how many times I'll get a totally different number here and a totally different number here even. And I'm like, okay. Somehow it made sense, I don't know. But just do the simple math. Just add it up, because obviously sometimes they're not going to have simple answers, simple numbers like that. It might be they're going to borrow, they make it so precise. They're going to borrow $367,232.47. Okay, I know exactly what they're going to borrow. Now, what if the buyer, they go under contract with a 90-10? What if the buyer doesn't have 10% down at that point and they have to do a 95-5, but they're already under contract? Can they do that?
Yes,
Why?
as long as the seller gets paid, they're covered.
Says right there, readjust it.
Okay, well, that's the reason why, because the contract says that they can do it.
And sometimes appraisals make it like mandatory that you adjust those numbers, right?
the appraisal may come in low, but that doesn't automatically obligate. That means buyer and seller have to go and renegotiate. Unless you had an addendum that says that they're gonna pay the appraised value. We're not going there. But so that's a separate issue. But the answer is, the reason why they can do that is the contract says that they can't. The contract says they can't. Hey, you have to stick to the terms that are here, otherwise you're in default. Then that's what it would be. But it just says any amount shown in section 2.1C through 2.1E may be adjusted as deemed necessary by the buyer and the lender. People ask me, if I decide to do this, is that okay? It's perfectly fine. You have the right to do it. Okay? Now here's the big difference. People have asked, they do a conventional loan. They're gonna do a conventional loan here. And now they're asking, or we've actually had it, people have just gone and switched to FHA. Can they do that?
No, because they need FHA, then
Which requires what?
sign a contract, seller buyer.
I mean, so to go FHA, you have to have authorization from the seller. Both buyer and seller have to agree to go FHA. So for a buyer to go from conventional to FHA, they can't just unilaterally do that. They have to get signed authorization or signed agreement between both parties to make that change. Now, if I was supposed to go FHA, can I agree to go conventional without an authorization? The answer would be yes. That doesn't require a seller's authorization to go conventional. Okay? Make sense? Okay. All right, 2.2. This is a great addition that was added into this contract 6 years ago, whenever it was. It requires our buyer to disclose to the seller if they have a home to sell. In the past, there was an addendum if they had it, so it didn't promote the, it didn't encourage isn't the right answer. It didn't require the disclosure of the buyer to bring this forth. It gave the buyer the option as a disclosure that yes, they have to sell a house in order to purchase this. Now it makes it very clear. If buyer's ability to purchase the property to obtain a loan referenced in section 2 above and or any portion of the cash reserves is or is not conditioned upon the sale. So meaning, if you have to sell a property and any of that money that you're going to be using with the sale of that property is going to be used towards the purchase of this, then you must disclose that it is conditioned upon selling a house. If you're not, if you don't, you want to sell a house, but you don't have to, well, then you should better get something from the lender that shows that they can qualify for both loans. But if you're going to use, even though I don't have to, if I want to use the money from the sale of that property, well, then I've got to disclose it. It's that simple. Okay. What's the difference between settlement and closing? There is a difference.
Settlement is when all the documents get signed. Closing is when all the money gets in the right place and the county records it.
I'll give you 98, 99% correct. Who has the other 2% for me? That fixes what he said.
I thought the answer was great.
It was. It was 98% great.
The money is received during settlement. And then closing is when all the recording gets done.
No, partially correct.
Okay, maybe the other 2% is settlement is when both parties sign.
No, well, yes, I mean, that is the completion of settlement with both parties have signed. But if I'm one side that has settled, I've done my portion, I've signed the documents. You're gonna look at this and you're gonna roll your eyes when it's, You said all the money for closing is received on, when it funds and records. You said all the money.
All the monies.
Is it all the money
I
when,
was like,
what, remember the $30,000 that we have, the buyer has to bring in? That occurs at settlement.
Okay.
So the buyer's down payment. So settlement shall take place no later than the settlement, otherwise mutually agreed. Settlement shall occur only when and while all the following have completed. Buyer and seller have signed and delivered to each other and their escrow closing office all documents required by the REPC, by the lender, and by title. So all the documents. By written escrow instruction. Including split. Okay. Any monies required to be paid by buyer or seller under these documents? That's the down payment. At settlement, the buyer, they bring in they either wire it, they bring in a cashier's check or whatever it is. They bring in at settlement the remaining amount of their down payment.
So what if their earnest money is just 10 grand and that's all their down payment is?
We've
Does
already
that
got it.
still like?
They've already got it. They've
So
already
then
brought, they've
title
already
just
brought
takes
them.
care of that at settlement and then everything else happens at closing?
That's part of the settlement is the monies that are needed to be brought in are accounted for. Now, sometimes we have to issue money back to the title company, sometimes we don't. But we have record of it, so that counts as part of the settlement. So that's why I was saying your answer is about 98, 99% accurate. The money that comes at funding and recording is what's coming from the lender. The 360 grand is what's now coming for the last part. And that's where the two, once they've collected it, the title company is going to combine the down payment, plus they now have the money from the lender, brought them together, and then they disperse it out where it's supposed to go. Here, X goes to the seller, this goes to the new lender, these are commissions, whatever it is. They pay off everything once they've collected both sides. And that's now happening at the funding and recording. Make sense?
So can we say that the settlement is when all the papers are signed and all the monies are, can we say they were exchanged?
You would just, the way I would phrase is this: they go sign documents and the buyer has brought in their deposit, their down payment. They brought in their down payment. Now, you may be thinking, why does it matter? They're basically seeing about the same thing. And we're all guilty of this. I still do it when I'm talking with my clients. Hey, at closing, we'll go ahead and do this. When in reality, I mean, at settlement, we're going to do this. Because what happens when we tell, hey, at closing, you're going to get your keys? Typically true, right? Well, it might be. If it's a vacant property at closing, when it funds and records, they're now the property owner, they're going to get their keys. Hey, come on in, and at closing, we're going to go ahead and sign documents. But yeah, at closing, you're going to get your keys. I said that in another conversation. So they're coming in to sign, and they think they're going to closing, when in reality, they're going to settlement, because I was not, to my mind, they're basically the same thing, but they're not. So they come in and sign, where are my keys? Oh, well, you get that at closing. Well, you told me this is closing. Right, sorry, I totally forgot. It's a Friday, I know that, but it's gonna fund and record on Monday because it's now 4 o'clock. It's too late to fund and record, so closing's actually gonna be on Monday. You're gonna get your keys then, but we got movers all lined up. I'm sorry. So we need to do a better job communicating the right language for one, and then educating our clients what the difference of the two are. The other thing about this is, say a repair that is supposed to be done. Rachel, you represent the seller, I represent the buyer, and I ask for some repairs to be done. And the repairs need to be done before closing. Great, they accept it. And let's say it's a roof that your client has to repair. Tomorrow, we're supposed to close. The roof hasn't even been started yet. Is their client in default? Are they?
Wait, you said it has to be done by closing, so we're scheduled to settle tomorrow or
I
close?
said closing. I said the contract is repairs must be done prior to closing. And tomorrow is our settlement deadline. And it's a roof that needs to be replaced, and it's a week time frame to get the roof done, and they haven't even started.
Well. they
Or is your client in default?
Not until closing.
Think about it.
They still have a
The
week.
contract says, no, the settlement's tomorrow.
Right, but I thought you said then closing's a week out.
No, closing, it'll take a week to do the roof. And once it settles, closing can happen same day. If you said, if we sign tomorrow morning, if all the money transfers tomorrow, it could close on the same day we settle. So closing could happen tomorrow. It could happen Monday because we signed so late. But closing is going to basically happen shortly after we settle. And the likelihood of the roof being done by that time is probably not very possible. But my point being is, until it closes, her client is not in default. Because they have until closing to get the repair done. Now, what if I would have said, repairs must be done prior to settlement?
Then it'd be-
Now settlement comes, do I have to sign? They haven't done the repairs. Prior to settlement, they have until 5 PM to do, they haven't started the repairs. There's nothing for me to sign yet because they haven't done the repairs. Versus the other way, I have to still sign. And then once they're finally in default, once funding and recording happens, and now we have to deal with this in court. So you see how what I said earlier, a simple word can make the difference between a good contract and a bad contract. Repairs to be done prior to settlement, prior to closing. One word just made a nightmare of a transaction even worse. Okay, big difference between the two. Okay, possession. Pretty simple. I'm a firm believer in our job is to facilitate the transaction and make this to be as smooth as possible. Our job is not, now there's several agents out there that I swear they either their life is set up in a way that they just have to try to win at all costs, or they're trying to demonstrate to their client that no one's going to push us around. I've got your back, client. This is why you hired me, for the tough positions. And some people, they thrive on that. Great. If I need to go to battle, I can go to battle. But our job is to facilitate the transaction and make it as smooth as possible. So possession, for example, if I'm representing a seller and my seller has told me, hey, we're going to need 2-3 days to get out of here. Okay, well, I want to make sure that I give my client 2-3 days to get out of there. If I am writing an offer and I represent a buyer, does my buyer want to get in the property right when it closes, when they get keys? Of course they do. When is the buyer going to be more understanding? When you write the offer or when they've got the keys? When you write the offer. So as a buyer's agent, if I was doing this, I'd be sitting there, hey, Rachel, I know that you're going to want to get in the property. More than likely, the seller is going to probably need some time. So my recommendation is let's give them 2 to 3 days. Let's find out first how much time they may need. Let's ask. They say, yeah, 24 hours all we need. Perfect. Let's give them 24 hours in our offer. That way it's a smooth, easy transition. Is that not a better approach versus coming in there like, I want this possession immediately when I got the key. Well, okay. If it's a vacant home, possession's great. Get it immediately at recording. No problem. But just think a little bit. Let's try to make the transaction smooth, because if I handle that up front and I prepared my client all along, yeah, they want the home right when it closes, but they're going to be okay waiting for 24 hours. They're prepared for it. It's not going to be a problem. Okay,
So why they use the word recording instead of closing?
I don't know why they're, well,
I mean, isn't
clo-
that what a closing is upon recording?
technically, recording is when the documents have been recorded, and that usually happens after the funding has been accomplished. Closing is when both are done. So if you say at closing at recording, it'll be able to be used interchangeably, but the contract is broken down at recording. So I wish I had a better answer for you. It's basically the same thing.
Okay.
Anyone not know what a special assessment is? Okay, thanks for being on. Appreciate it. Okay, special assessments are typically tied around HOAs. Okay, so an HOA, everyone understands an HOA. If there's 100 units in that complex, so it's a condo complex, there's 100 units, and there are 100 different owners of each of those condos. If I was one of those owners, I have 1/100th of ownership in that complex. Okay, and together there is an HOA that has been formed to help manage the facility. We all know what common areas, right? Like there's a playground in that complex, then yeah, I have 1/100th of an ownership in the whole complex. And so if the playground, now let's say it's been there for 15 years and it's getting dangerous, and the complex has decided, actually we'll do a better example because it's more likely to happen. So it's a newer complex. Let's say that it's only been around for 2 years. And this is a real example. It's all been sold out, so it's all 100% occupied with all the owners. And what was never installed when they built the property were outside lighting on the parking fixture, outside curb lighting, and cars are starting to get broken into in the darker areas specifically. And so the HOA got together and say, hey, we want to add some lighting here to cut down on all these break-ins. And it's going to cost $300,000 to get all of that lighting installed in the complex. And that means each homeowner, if it passes, would be required to pay $3,000 special assessment. This is outside of their normal monthly dues. So the HOA has a monthly fee of $150, $250, whatever it is, that go towards the general upkeep of that HOA. Well, this special assessment is either something that was out of choice to make an improvement, or let's say that the complex is 40 years old and they have not managed their HOA budget very well, and all the roofs need to be replaced, and it's $1 million expense. And so now each homeowner will be assessed a $10,000 cost to pay for the roof. It's going to go to a vote. And if 51% of the ownership vote in favor of the special assessment, then all 100 homeowners are going to be required to pay it. So this is saying, hey, if there's any special assessment that has been already passed with the HOA, who's going to pay for it? Buyer, seller, or it's going to be split? I mean, obviously the seller wants the buyer to pay for it, and the buyer is going to obviously want the seller to pay for it. So just, you need to do your due diligence if you represent a buyer or if you represent a seller. Is there a special assessment? If there's not, well, then it's not going to matter. I see a hand? Okay. Fees, HOA, transfer fees, escrow fees. This just defines what those fees are and who's going to be responsible for paying them. The great addition here really came down to this change of ownership thing when they broke this up. It's been happening now for the last 3 to 5 years, probably a little longer than that. Now most HOAs are doing it. It's not that big of a deal anymore. When this first came out, this was a big deal because at the time there were only a few HOAs that were having these transfer fees, and they tried to, like Daybreak. Everyone knows what a transfer fee is, right? If you're changing out, you're selling a property, that buyer, or it could be either one, buyer or seller, may have to pay a fee to the HOA to make that transfer happen. So Daybreak was always the big one, where it was 0.5%, or it is 0.5%. So you think about it, a $500,000 home, the buyer now has to pay $2,500 to the HOA just to transfer. But then they also have 2 or 3 HOAs, and they may have 2 or 3 different transfer fees. And what was happening is an agent would say, seller is responsible for paying transfer fee. Okay, well, one HOA defines it as a transfer fee, another HOA defines it as a change of ownership fee. And so is defined, oh, no, it's a transfer fee, I'm not paying it. So this whole paragraph just says, look, I don't care what it's defined as. If there's a fee that is incurring because the ownership is changing, then that fee or fees will be responsible by whoever you define that's going to be paid for it. Okay? So make sure that it's happened. And all personal experience. It happens to everybody. So do your due diligence. I remember what's the buyer selling it. You represent the buyer. I represented a buyer, and the seller was, he was like the HOA president, and he just selling his property. He just stepped down, just released. So I asked, and got in writing, called the HOA. You know, he was the past president. No, we don't have anything. The listing agent even said that they did not have a transfer fee. We get to closing. Somewhere along the line, the seller was wrong. There was a transfer fee that was involved. I want to say it was $1,500, $2,000, whatever it was. And you know what? I didn't call the HOA. We asked the listing agent, and the listing agent, he was the HOA president. Yes, there is no transfer fee. And so I just took that as gospel. We get to closing, sure enough, there was, whatever it was. I want to say it was $1,500, whatever it was. And of course, my client's paranoid. They're like, there's another $1,500 I'm now going to be responsible for. I remember vividly. You don't worry about it. I will get it taken care of. You're not going to have to pay for that. Because I decided at that point, if I can't get it resolved, I'm going to pay for it. Because I looked at it myself. Could I have called the HOA to verify that? Yes, I could have. And I didn't. And so I looked it upon myself. I did not do my job. Therefore, I'm not going to let my client pay for that. Now, I think the listing agent and I, we worked it out. I want to say we both paid for half. So it was like $750 a piece or something like that. Because he felt the same way. We knew that we talked about it and the information was wrong. So I want to say we split it 50-50. But no matter what, I was already ready because I didn't do what I should have done. I should have called the HOA, the current HOA, because it's always possible that something has now been brought new that the past president or board member was unaware of. And that's ultimately what happened.
I'm just curious how that happens. So if you're like, okay, we'll take care of it, then you're there at settlement, and does title just have to like change their documents and allocate $750 of your commission, $750 of their commission to cover that transfer fee? Like then they're reprinting documents or?
When we found out what happened is the area the speed came up, what? And then title is trying to like, okay, well, who's paying for it? And we're going back and forth. And then agents talk about it. We'll split half and half. Okay, great.
So you found out before settlement.
Well, it's at settlement, we like when they sent the closing docs, so which you usually get a day or two before. You're like, here, take a look at these, make sure they look correct. Wait a minute, no, what's this transfer fee? Oh, that's pulling up here. I'm like, what? No, I verified this.
So you did see it before you were like signing?
No, yeah, I wasn't
documents?
sitting at.
Oh, that's what I was imagining.
wasn't
You're
sit-
like at the table signing.
Could that happen? Yes, because all parties, docs have taken the last second to finally get done. We're waiting at the close, I've been there, we're waiting at the closing table. I have not even seen docs yet. Oh, they're coming. Okay, we're sitting at the closing table, they bring docs into us. And I'm looking at right there, that's happened. So could it have happened like that? Yes. This case, it didn't. It was a day or two before and we got it resolved before. But key part about it is they told me, I didn't, don't worry about it. You will not have to pay that, I promise you. Because I knew I will take it if I have to. Great, they never worried again about it. And it was resolved. So, okay. Section 5, real quick here. Black. Real quick, this is not, I've had agents that think that if they put the disclosure here, this is all that is necessary to define agency. Meaning, if you represent a buyer and you fill this in right here, you don't need to get a buyer broker agreement because you wrote it here. That is not what this is. It's exactly what it's titled as. It's a confirmation of agency disclosure. You're confirming that you've already established agency in another written document, your buyer broker agreement or your listing agreement. This is just to confirm that it's been done. That's it. Okay. Title report, long-term lease and rental agreements. We'll just go real quickly here. In the area that we typically work here, we don't deal with as much of your short-term rental, long-term rental, Airbnbs and stuff like that. But your vacation areas from St. George, Park City and everything, they're going to deal with this all the time. If you have a property that is used as for rentals, long-term rentals, well, oh, we do use this, an investor property. So this is the documents that are required. And when we get into section 7, talk about seller's disclosures, you've got to provide these things. But it's just defining what the short-term rental agreement is, what is considered long-term, and anything over the 30 days, anything under the 30 days. Is the area that you're in able to do that type of rental? And if so, or do you have written agreements? And if so, you got to provide those. Seller's disclosures. Biggest problem listing agents have, especially newer listing agents that to get their first listing, is their first thought is that the only thing that they have to provide is the 7-page document that say seller's disclosures. Yeah, I got my seller's disclosures filled out. I provided those in time. Well, those are just one of the required documents in all of section 7. So if the home was built before 1978, you've got to provide the lead-based paint. You've got to provide a copy of title commitment. So if I take a listing today, and especially 3 or 4 months ago when the market was so raging, you put a home on the market and you turn it on the MLS, you've got 10, 15 offers by the end of the night. Is that unrealistic or was that pretty realistic with what was happening? That's what was happening. So if today was, let's just say today was Friday, and I've never given the title company told them I got a new listing, and all of a sudden before the weekend is over, I've already put that home under contract, and I have 3 days to provide seller's disclosures. I'm probably not going to be giving the title company very much time to pull that report for me. And there's a good chance that I would be my seller will be in default because I will not be able to fulfill this obligation and get all that information to them within that 3-day requirement. So when you're the listing agent, seller's disclosure deadline, it means that you have to provide all of this. If they have rentals, you got to provide a copy of those short-term or long-term rental agreements. If there's water shares, you're going to have to provide the certificate of the water rights, the water shares that are there. Any CC&Rs that the complex may have, you got to provide those. So I'm not asking you to memorize in this. I'm just asking you, come look at section 7 of the REPC and know what you need to be doing if you're representing a seller. Because if you do not give this stuff by the deadline, your seller is in default. And if it's a $10,000 earnest money, predetermined liquidated damages, you've potentially put your client in default, and your seller could owe, as one of the remedies, 10 grand. Okay?
So if somebody comes in with a cash offer and it is accepted, can that be excluded or waived or whatever?
Good question. It happens all the time where, like, I have a listing right now that the seller has never lived in the property. So the question is can this parties agree to remove section 7 from the contract? The answer is yes. So you can, seller shall not be obligated to provide anything in section 7. Okay, so now there is no seller disclosure deadline. The rest of that, your answer, we'll talk about in section 10. So when we get to section 10, make sure I come back to your question because I don't want to bounce around to it. Because even though the parties agree to doing that, there's still stuff that's required in section 10. Okay. Section 8, military, get out of military for mental issues. This is your get out of jail free section, right? Section 8.1 is talking about due diligence. 8.2 is talking about appraisal. 8.3 is talking about financing. Okay, those 3 things. All 3 of them are contingencies for the buyer to be able to cancel and get their earnest money back, right? Shouldn't be anything new. Due diligence, I'm just going to sum it up. For any reason the buyer would like to cancel, as long as they do it prior to the due diligence deadline, they can cancel. And unless these last 9-10 months people have been offering non-refundable earnest money, well, if you're offering non-refundable earnest money, you're changing the term of the contract here. I'm not talking about any of those. If you put non-refundable earnest money upon acceptance, your earnest money is non-refundable, period. I'm not talking about those. If it's a normal deal where you're giving yourself a due diligence deadline to be able to cancel, and if so, you cancel before that deadline, then you can get your earnest money back. Just plain as day. Okay? Let's come down to section 8.3. 8.3BI talks about, has this little dollar amount, this little blank section. This section is talking about financing. What this paragraph is saying that if the buyer decides to cancel after the due diligence deadline, but before the financing deadline, then buyer agrees to basically give whatever dollar amount is here to the seller as liquidated damages. So our example in this offer is $10,000 earnest money, right? So if we said $2,000 right here, in our example, and the buyer did go past the due diligence deadline and they canceled based on financing, then in that case, $2,000 would go to the seller and the buyer would get $8,000 back. Okay. Now you may be thinking, why would I ever want to put money here? If you represent the buyer, why would you ever want to put money there?
Because if you don't put money there and then cancel after the due diligence period and before the financing period, then they owe the whole 10,000.
If you don't put money there, so if you left it blank,
You left it blank.
that's incorrect.
Would it be just to make your like offer stronger? That's the only reason.
Okay. If you leave this blank and they cancel after due diligence, but before the financing, the buyer would get all the earnest money back. Because there's nothing there, because it's, whereupon $0 of buyer's earnest money deposits shall be released to the seller without any requirement. It's really to make the offer stronger. If you're in a very competitive market, which we are, and the buyer is prepared to, they don't want to offer non-refundable upon acceptance because they want to at least see the condition of the house first. But once they feel good about the condition of the home, then they're willing to say, hey, I'm okay to give some non-refundable earnest money at this point. And so now it's making their offer stronger. If I represent the seller, I can tell you my rule of thumb is whatever the earnest money amount is going to be that buyer and seller are going to be agreed upon, my rule of thumb is I'm putting half the earnest money here. So in our example, if earnest money was 10 grand, representing the seller, I'm going to want $5,000 right here. Because happens all the time. People cancel after due diligence. They claim it's for a financing reason, but in my opinion, they're canceling based on a due diligence reason. And if they're going to do that, there's going to be consequences to the buyer. Right now, the market allows it to happen. So my advice to you, if you represent a seller, make sure that you have dollars here. I would at least try with get half, but I would do something because it happens all the time. You're going to be with your seller, and a day before the financing deadline or day of the financing deadline, and your seller thinks everything's fine, moving along. The buyer's asking for a price reduction or they're asking for repairs. And I don't want to get into the explanation as to why. I don't say we don't have time, but they're going to justify that the repairs that they're asking for affect their financing. And we're not a court. Unless we're going to go in front of a judge and the judge is going to determine if what they're doing works or not, it's going to create fiasco. So rather than putting our seller in that situation, if the buyer does decide to cancel after the due diligence, well, there's going to be consequences. And I'm going to make sure that my seller is protected in that way of those consequences. Okay. Now, sounded all simple, but there's one caveat. What if the buyer is canceling because the home did not appraise? Okay, that's the big difference here. This whole paragraph is only talking about the financing condition. If they're
Why does it say
canceling,
financing and appraisal deadline?
That's what I was gonna say.
That's what,
that's just talking about a deadline. That doesn't talk about the condition. It's not talking about the contingency. They just lumped the two deadlines. Can you break appraisal deadline to be what's today? November 5th. Appraisal deadline to be November 6th and the financing deadline to be November 9th. You can do that. They just gave the two deadlines together, the dates together, but they're totally separate conditions. 8.2 is this, 8.3 is this. So if you're going to cancel based on the appraisal, in our buyer's notice of cancellation, there is there's a buyer's notice cancellation, and there's 3 boxes to check. You either check 1, 2, or 3. Not 2 and 3, not 1 and 3, not 1, 2, and 3. It's one of the options. Option 1 is you're canceling before the due diligence deadline. Option 2, you're canceling after the due diligence deadline, but before the finance and appraisal deadline. Option 3, you're canceling after due diligence and finance and appraisal deadline. And then it gives other reasons why you're going to cancel. Pretty simple. So in this example, if you're canceling because it did not appraise, you're canceling based on option 2, after due diligence deadline, but before the finance and appraisal deadline. And this is the big and. You must provide a copy of the notice of appraised value with your cancellation. That's either the entire appraisal or the page that shows the appraised value with your cancellation. And that is proof that you're canceling. And in that case, if you did have $5,000 here, I'm not canceling based on financing. So therefore, the full $10,000 would be able to go back to the buyer in that case. But if you don't provide that notice of appraised value with it, you're canceling based on financing, which just costs your buyer $5,000. Okay. Now, when we say buyer's right to cancel, and it's basically the same thing. Buyer's right to cancel. If buyer determines in buyer's sole discretion. Whose discretion? Buyers and sole discretion. That seemed pretty specific, doesn't it? That the results of the due diligence are unacceptable. Buyer may either no later than the due diligence deadline to resolve in writing any objections, but the whole thing go. Okay. Well, let's actually do it. No later than the due diligence deadline, reference in section 1, cancel the REPC by providing written notice to the seller, whereupon the earnest money deposit will be released back to the buyer. This is on that title company addendum. This is the language that gets changed. The REPC says if the earnest money is held with our trust account, if my buyer cancels before the deadline, I don't need any authorization from the seller to release that earnest money. It's very clear in the contract. A title company is a third party. They're not bound by this REPC. They can have their own requirements to release that earnest money. And their requirement typically ends up being, we want buyer and seller to both sign and agree to this. Okay, but what must I provide? It says provide written notice. What does that look like? What's written notice?
Addendum.
Okay, you could do it. You could sign an addendum that says buyer and seller mutually agree to cancel this contract, but the addendum is going to typically require both signatures. It's going to ask for both signatures.
It's a cancellation.
Okay, notice cancellation. Okay, that works. What about an email? Who says an email works?
If it's in writing,
Okay, it's written. I would say that written notice, an email would fall within that category. What about a text?
yes.
It just isn't as reliable.
Why not?
That's why I have written down here.
Okay,
I would say yes.
okay. Now, would I be hosting the class effectively if I didn't set this up as a trick question? Of course, I wouldn't be doing it the right way unless I had a trick question. So, although that is correct under here, and in everything in section 8, it says you must provide written notice, which I will say a text, email, a earnest money release, cancellation, all of those are written notices. Unfortunately, there's another section of the contract in section 18 that define how notices must be given. Except as providing in section 23, which is talking about acceptance. All notices required under the REPC must be in writing, signed by the buyer or seller giving the notice, and received by the buyer or seller or their recipient agent by the brokerage by the deadline. So a text, an email does not work. That is not signed by the buyer or the seller. And I get it all the time that, oh, here's our cancellation. Here's our email. It shows it's canceled. It was not canceled. Or the other thing our staff will ask for, when you send your cancellation, we will, if you don't send, the easiest way to do it is to send your cancellation through dot loop, because dot loop will also record when it was received and when it was opened. We can see all of that. But if you send that via an email, we're going to ask for proof of delivery that was received by that other side. And we got to have to show that that was received by the deadline. Otherwise, it's not going to be done in time. That's the reason why we ask for this stuff. I can promise you the things that our company asks for, it's not because I'm like, okay, I'm going to wake up. How can I make their job more of a hassle so that I can get more phone calls to me because I'm so bored through the day? Because what happens when you guys get so pissed off because, well, I don't have time, I got to do this. You call me and you're like, why do I do this? I'm like, look, there's a reason why we're asking for it. It is not because I'm trying to make your day hell. Nothing would make me happier, no offense, not to talk to anybody about that, because it would be everything's moving smooth. So if we're asking for something, there is a reason for it. And usually it's because of the contract requires it. Okay, I saw a hand back here. Guess not. Okay. Makes sense on the notices. So again, email and text does not work. Okay, let's go to section 10, which went back to your question. This goes, section 10 is the disclosure of requirements. Well, it's two things. When it's talking about the buyer, it talks about that the buyer is buying an as-is property. It's not a warranted home. Our old contracts we used to have, this is probably 10, 12 years ago, a seller was selling a warranted home. And what that meant is furnaces and air conditioning were the big issue. So a seller, they go turn their heat on, hot air is coming out of the furnace. Now it's an older furnace, but it works. It works. Buyer does an inspection and the inspector all of a sudden realizes there's a cracked combustion chamber and the furnace is shot. It's basically gone. The seller was obligated to fix that. $5,000 just cost the seller. Versus now, the buyer and seller, they're selling an as-is home. Now the buyer can do their inspection and they realize that there's a cracked combustion chamber. The buyer can still ask the seller to fix it. The seller's not obligated to fix it. They can do it of choice. Now, we understand that if they're selling a property well above market value or at market value and they have a crack, the furnace isn't working, they're going to probably need to fix it. So that fulfills that. But if they're already selling a property well below market value, then there's probably not, the buyer should understand that the seller's not going to fix something. But that's all negotiated. That's all negotiable. But section 10.3 is now talking about the seller's obligation to disclose known defects. So going back to your question, can the seller and buyer agree to not provide any seller's disclosures? The answer is yes, they can, but that doesn't prevent the seller from their requirement to disclose anything that they know about the property. That's the biggest misunderstanding. Oh, on seller's disclosures, I don't want to provide any seller's disclosures because I know that the foundation is shot. The seller is obligated to disclose a material fact. So now we go back to like what a material fact is. Let's just say that you walk into a house and it may not be a weight-bearing wall, but there is a massive hole in the wall. Okay, even photos that were taken, you see pictures that there's a big, huge hole in the wall. Would you have to disclose that?
Yes.
Right? Anyone else? It's not going to hurt to disclose it, but you walk in the wall. Whoa, big! I mean, there's a hole in the wall. It's there.
Well, according to that paragraph, it says that cannot be discovered by a reasonable inspection. So if it's visible, you don't have to, I would imagine.
This is where that part is correct. By definition, I would say that would be something you would not need to disclose because I mean, it is, you walk in, well, what's the whole, what happened here? I mean, heck, maybe it's a light body of a 14-year-old that got thrown by his brother through the wall and it's just still there, right? And they just, so you walk in, you can see it. Everybody can see it. It's there. If it was not disclosed and the buyer came back after closing and said, I want you to repair this. You never disclosed this in writing to me. And I now want you to repair this wall. I would come back and I'm like, are you kidding me? It's in every picture that's there. You walk in the house, the first thing you see is the big gaping hole in the wall. I don't think you would win as a buyer on that issue. What if I put a big painting over it?
Then you have to disclose it.
I covered up the wall on both sides. And now there's a painting that's over it. So when someone walks in, oh, it's a nice painting. And they move on. Yeah, in that scenario, I think the seller would be responsible for that. Even if they forgot. I mean, let's just say they put a big TV entertainment center right, and they forgot about it. Well, still, they knew when it was there at the time. Of course, they're not an inspector. An inspector isn't going to come down and take down the entertainment center to go inspect every little thing. So that would be an unreasonable inspection. That would be an unreasonable request. So if the seller has knowledge about it, they're going to be obligated to disclose that. And if they don't, they could be held liable. Okay? Let's see. Section 16. Okay, default by buyer or seller. The remedies for this are basically the same. The same default remedies for the buyer will be the same for the seller. They're just kind of in reverse order. So, and there's one of three options. It's not they get all three. It's one of three. So earnest money is what we already defined as predetermined liquidated damages. It's because, as we talked about, in option A, let's just say for buyer default. If buyer defaults, seller may elect one of the following remedies: cancel the REPC and retain the earnest money deposited upon, if applicable, as liquidated damages. That was the earnest money. And we determined what earnest money was right at the beginning. And so that's what the seller is going to choose. That is the remedy. Once they take that, the buyer's obligation for the contract is done. Or B, maintain the earnest money or deposits if applicable in a trust, and sue the buyer to specifically enforce the REPC. So for whatever reason, seller has been trying to get rid of this property for a while. There's nothing that they've disclosed everything, and buyer just finally realized, I'm in over my head. I don't want to lock myself down, but they have the money. It's not that they couldn't qualify, they just don't want the property anymore. The one I would look at, think of a property that is determined as a historical site. You may or may not be aware of it. Any of those properties that the state has determined this is a historical property, I would never want to own one of those, quite frankly, because you can't go in and just make your own remodeling. You've got to maintain the condition as it was at the time when that home was being built. So when you renovate the thing, it's got to still maintain that older historical feel. That could be so expensive. It would just be, for me personally, I would not want to be involved in those properties. But if I went under contract on it, thinking, oh, this might be a good opportunity or investment opportunity, and I pass all my deadlines, and now the seller's been trying to sell that property forever because they're in the same boat. No one wants to buy one of these properties because there's just too much commitment for it. And now I just like, hey, I'm canceling. You can have my $10,000 earnest money. Oh, it's not the buyer's choice. It's the seller's choice. So the seller could go to court and force the court, or have the court force the contract. And now I'm obligated to buy the property. So the seller can get out, let alone also be responsible for attorney's fees. It's possible. Don't know if it would happen, but it's possible. And C, return the earnest money if applicable, and the buyer pursue any or go after the buyer for any potential remedies. So the earnest money would be given back to the buyer, and the seller can sue me for whatever damages that they feel I'm entitled to, that they're entitled to. So if it's a $10,000 earnest money and the seller feels like they've been damaged $30,000, $40,000, that might be in their best interest to give me back the earnest money and now sue me. And then the opposite applies. So if it's the seller that's in default, and it happens, we had this last year, I think it's been 3 different times. We've had a seller just decide they didn't want to sell anymore. And it got one particular scenario, it got so ugly. So the seller was selling their house, and the seller's claim was, and we represented the seller, by the way, that the spouse was going through a lot of medical issues, and they thought it would be when they put it on the market that it was going to be the best thing. As they were under contract, it was causing just more stress upon the seller, and they decided that they just didn't want to sell anymore. It was just, they're going to just stay there while they're dealing with all the medical problems. Well, the buyer felt that they were canceling because of their ethnicity. They found out who they were, and they felt that that was the reason why they were trying to cancel. And there's no proof on anything about this. So, of course, the buyer is claiming a discrimination about the seller, and we're trying to work things out. I mean, we were first going, well, let's see here. If that were the reason, this was our position. If that were the reason, the sellers had cameras all through their house. If they were concerned about that, don't you think they probably would never have accepted your offer to begin with? And what the buyer didn't know is that the seller was also an ethnic group. And so again, claiming because they weren't a Caucasian seller, their argument didn't have as much weight. But the point being is it created a nightmare. And we're trying, seller, you're gonna be in default if you do not move forward. And all we were just asking, hey, what's it gonna take for both parties to mutually agree to cancel? And this is where you would do it, where we did an addendum. So both buyer and seller mutually agree to cancel the contract. In return, seller agrees to compensate the buyer for X. And that's ultimately what ended up happening. They came to a cash agreement to make it stop. But who knows what the other side may or may not be thinking. I personally believe that the buyer was wrong in their reason to think why they were canceling. Everything showed that what the seller was trying to do had nothing to do about diversity or ethnicity, but that was their opinion. The buyer thought otherwise. Create a very messy, sticky mess.
So I'm sitting here thinking, so let's say I'm the seller's agent, okay? And you have a really, really eager buyer.
Okay.
And they want to put down, let's just say $20,000, it's earnest money.
Mhm.
I would say that being the seller's agent, to protect the agent, I would say, I don't know.
The
how
agent
would-
or protect the seller?
I mean, to protect the seller.
Okay.
I would tell the seller, I don't know if I would take the 20,000 as an earnest money. Because in case he decides to cancel, then now he's obligated to pay the 20,000 too. So I guess my question is that advisable to tell the seller, nah, don't take that much, just take whatever you think you can pay? Is that, I don't know if that makes any sense.
It makes sense. Let me handle that a little bit differently. I would never advise the seller, don't do this. Because what if the buyer then defaulted and now they come back to you and said,
Okay.
you cost me $15,000, $20,000 because you told me not to take a $20,000 earnest money check.
Right.
So what I would say is, I'd phrase it this way, just say, I have the seller, hey, seller, the earnest money, it's a two-way street. This is a great way that if the buyer is ever in default, if it's substantial enough, then if they default, that might be the easiest remedy and way to protect you. But in return, seller, you also need to understand, if there's any reason that would cause you to be in default, then you would also be required, you could potentially owe that as well. So you need to pick a number you're gonna feel comfortable with, that it's enough if the buyer defaults that you're protected, but it's not so much that if you became in default that you couldn't cover. What number do you feel like that needs to be? See the difference? That way it's, if they come back, I didn't make you do anything. I told you my job is to give you the information about it, not
Advice.
Quick question on that as well. Would you say that it would be advisable to just say, okay, cool, we had this discussion. I'm just going to send you a quick email going over everything we talked about?
always.
Okay.
This is where a text becomes an issue. People are like, I just quick text message. I always have a conversation with my client verbally. Go back and forth, talk about it. And then once, especially on real issues, we come back and then back it up with a phone call. Just say, hey, just want to make sure that we're on the same page. We talked about X, Y, and Z, and you're good with that. Is that correct? Yes. And now you've got the email chain to verify your verbal conversation. Too many negotiating things are happening on text, and they're never negotiated very well. So don't just fall back on that, okay? And then tail end stuff, we already did notices. We'll talk about, okay. Just, so by default, the contract has a default of 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time on every given day. Whether it's not just business days, it's calendar days that are there. So unless you specify otherwise, 5 p.m. is your deadline. Now, the one thing, let's just read through this. Time is of the essence regarding the dates set forth in in the REPC. Extensions must be agreed to in writing by all parties. Unless otherwise explicitly stated in the REPC, performance under each section of the REPC which references the date shall absolutely be required. This is what I want to get at. Say it in it. The term days and calendar days shall mean calendar days and shall be counted beginning on the day following the event that triggers the timing requirement. So sometimes people have tried to put in there, we'll see on there X days after acceptance. You know, so due diligence deadline is 5 days after acceptance. Well, what if you put 5 days from acceptance? Did that change?
Then the acceptance date's included.
Okay, so this is where I want to make sure that we understand this. That's the way I would normally think that's the case, that you're taking that acceptance deadline as the starting point versus after. Well, this makes it very clear on what that language is. And it's saying that the days occur after whatever triggers the event. So even if I wrote it that way, 5 days from acceptance,
That's what governs.
this governs, so it's still going to be as if it's after. Okay? Because the event is triggered for today. Okay, well, this means after that day is the actual starting date of it. If you do write, so what I try to tell people in that case, don't do from the event, it confuses things more. If you are going to do X days after acceptance, great, go ahead and do that. Put it after acceptance. It just clarifies it. But 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time is that date. That means at 5:01, your party is in default if they didn't do something. And I hear it all the time. Well, it's only a minute. What's the big deal? It is a big deal. And if you're one of those people that is, it's not a big deal. Well, it may cost you a couple $1,000s before you realize that it might be a big deal. So just understand that this is here, and we'll end with, these last two. 23, acceptance. Understanding what acceptance is. Too many times people are telling me, yeah, we've accepted your offer, when in reality that hasn't happened. Verbally, you may be telling, hey, we're verbally accepting your offer. By the way, did everyone sign that? Did everyone sign that came here? No. Make sure you sign this. If you're trying to tell someone that you verbally accepted their offer, just tell them, hey, we verbally accepted it. My client's not home to be able to sign anything right now, but they plan on signing that when we get back tonight. Great, I haven't done anything wrong there. I've told the truth. But if I said, yes, we've accepted your offer, these two things have to happen. Acceptance occurs when A, the seller or buyer has signed the offer or counteroffer, noted, and seller or buyer or their agent has communicated to the other party that has been signed. So it's got to be signed and communicated. That's when acceptance has occurred. So if you're just trying to be like, yes, my client plans on accepting it, tell them, we have verbally accepted your offer. That's all that's happening. Verbal acceptance is not binding. That is. So make sure that you're not saying something that hasn't happened. And then the last part, under 24, people always ask, what do you usually put here? There is no right or wrong answer. I can just tell you what I typically do. I'd say 3 to 4 days after acceptance here. Due diligence, I at least try to get 2 weeks. So 14 days. Finance and appraisal deadline, I say between 21 to 24 days. And then settlement, 30 to 35, if it's a USDA loan, they may take a little longer. If it's a small credit union, they may take longer. So you need to ask. This one I would always ask your lender, how much time do you need to do the deal? And that's kind of the key thing, but there is no right or wrong answer, but those are just kind of a general answer. Obviously, in a very competitive market, you got to tighten those days up considerably. Okay,
Anyone else need this?
any questions about a lot of this? Like I said, it's
If
a
you
lot.
do a cash offer, do you have to still put a date on there? Can that be?
Well, if it's cash offer, I would say NA on, so like if there's no finance and appraisal, NA.
But you
Whatever.
cannot leave it blank. You have
The
to.
only, yeah, you want to define if it's involved or not. If there's no finance and appraisal, then yeah, you just put NA here. Okay? If you're online, make sure that you, if you're watching this on Zoom, make sure that you end it with go Red Sox, even though their year's over. There you go. You'll know. Okay. If you have questions, feel free to come up and ask me. And otherwise, thank you very much. A lot of information very quickly. I understand that, but hopefully you guys walked away with something. Okay.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Bet. Thank you so much. Yes, sir.
So A would be 10,000. B is 0. So C is 360.
He is talking about seller financing. Yeah, D seller financing. So there isn't going to be any seller finance. In our example, there wasn't. So that was just 0. And then E was the $30,000.
Okay.
So that the 30 plus the 10 equals the 40, which gives you your 400.
Okay. All right.
There you go.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah. You got time now?
Let me see what.
Thank you, Rob.
You bet. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I can do it. Can I just go back real quick?
Yeah.
You're gonna go grab your cat.